Hey everyone, how's it going? Can you hear me pretty well? Yeah. Are we doing pretty well at lunch? I can just stand. If you need to stand and stay awake, no problem. But thanks for joining. I know we have some strong competition in some of the other rooms right now, but I wanted to talk about my experience running the PSIRT at ServiceNow. And just a few years ago, we hit Fortune 500 status. So the theme of all this is not only are we learning, but we're learning as we speak through it. So thank you everyone again for attending this. I was curious about the audience. How many other folks are in PSIRTs or I guess never have been? Okay, that's solid. Nice. Yeah, you weren't kidding about that. Cool. So really appreciate that. So for me, originally started as a web app developer, always liked security more though. So I was able to get into security research, and I'll talk about it in a little bit, but I was able also to be an AppSec educator working with developers. I got coached to start ServiceNow's PSIRT about 2.5 years ago. ServiceNow had a bounty program. It has a responsible disclosure program, the BDP, as well, and all that needed like an official house and an official team. So joined 2.5 years ago to start that, turned to First Framework. It wasn't my first rodeo through PSIRT, but to actually like organize our growth, turned to the services framework and said, here's where we're going to start. We're up to 12 engineers and on 3 continents right now. So we're a CNA, we're a member of First.org. I'm also an MBA student, about halfway through that during nights and weekends. Before joining ServiceNow, two experiences being a CNA. One, a researcher CNA myself, another one at ForcePoint. Again, at ForcePoint, we were in First.org, also been at Okta, NVIDIA, some gov contractors. And then for the bit of free time I have, I did a lot of search and rescue for like 6 or 7 years and then just ran out of free time. So the takeaway for the bio, at least for this slide, is my experiences over time at tech companies have gone from on-prem to hosted, just with the trend of cloud. And that's really where this perspective comes from. So long story short, been in PSIRT since 2015. I was able to take what I feel like is an 18-month refresher at Okta, where I got to work with developers, actually get into like prevention and education, like some of that early life cycle stuff. Then got poached back into PSIRT land. And I think I like tech too fun. I can explain that at the end if people have a question. But I think PSIRTs are genuinely pretty exciting. So the premise for the talk is PSIRTs at a SaaS, I feel like have some challenges and some opportunities that are different than those at a vendor who strictly makes on-prem software. Some of the challenges can be that your infrastructure that you're hosting for customers is arguably easily discoverable, probably internet connected. Some opportunities though that come with that is you have some signals through detections and telemetry to maybe make some risk-based decisions to say this issue needs to be fixed tonight, it needs to be fixed next week, like kind of how much time you have, and how disruptive are you going to be to the business. So for agenda, what we will cover is risk factors. We'll cover a bit about hosted and on-prem. Challenges, I try not to be too negative, but challenges are probably about 70% of the presentation, with opportunities being about 30%. I can't give advice, so a lot of these are just things to think about, or I present maybe 2 schools of thought. Even if one is really silly, you might be like, that's dumb. I'm going to give you both. I'm not a lawyer. These are, of course, my own views. Your situation's likely very different, and to be honest, my advice is probably pretty bad anyway. So, so don't take it. The biggest risk factor for me when I was thinking about this presentation is like the speed of attack surface discovery, right? You know, you've got you're hosting for customers, you want them to easily get to the software that you're billing them for, and of course that also means researchers, attackers have probably just as easy convenient access to it. Some people choose to host customers as subdomains of like company.com or whatever. Can be super convenient. I'm not saying get away from that. Like using that, getting away from that as a measure of security would just be obscurity. So don't worry about that. But it can lead to interesting things like fast enumeration of other customers. And if you have customers who are doing pen tests on what they think is their own scope, they accidentally might mess up scope, and start pen testing other customers. Some more things to think about are kind of that speed of the learning curve for researchers. It's my opinion that at least to get to that point where a researcher can find basic web vulnerabilities, it's pretty fast. Like you're not reversing malware. I don't know how to mess with a chipset, like that sort of thing. The software is easily accessible. It might be free or might have some sort of soft paywall or trialware. It's instantly ready. I don't have to go set up servers. Maybe just sign up with an email address. And you know, with a laptop, maybe some free software, maybe even just a browser, you can start pen testing web apps. So, and as far as risk factors, when it comes to the target, again, internet connected, which means can't be within some customers feel the lockdown environment, less defense in depth there, so you lose a layer. Also, I feel like the stakes are higher because with CVSS, every time I'm running the calculator to talk about vulnerability or issue of CVE, attack vector consistently is network, which is the highest for that input. So I just feel that the severity of vulnerabilities in SaaS and PaaS, you know, at least from that limited perspective, start out pretty high. And then ingress and egress requirements, you don't always know what your customer does and doesn't want to have their service talked to or be reachable from, so you may not be able to implement much of a opinion on services that should be blocked. So in other words, the stakes are really high, and welcome to the show. So to me, cloud doesn't just, it doesn't mean hands off as a customer, like I bought your stuff and I have no further responsibility when it comes to the security of what I purchased from you. So there is, I won't lecture on the shared responsibility model, that's kind of a snooze fest, but you can think about the shared responsibility model, you can think about customer risk-based decision-making, whether they, the part they may play is based on the information the vendor gives out. Does that customer need to apply a patch faster than maybe even like a monthly patching automated cadence? Do they need to do and apply some interim mitigations? Unfortunately, a lot of these situations and realities and expectations get tested during a crisis, which is when some customers may realize a little late that they do play a part, that communications from the vendor and stuff like that are pretty important. Another challenge is visibility or telemetry. So another thing customers might be surprised about during or after a crisis, they may ask the vendor, hey, was I breached? Which is like a pretty hot question. The vendor may absolutely not have visibility into the request and response, like on purpose. It may be an absolute vulnerability, it may be in the contracts that, hey, we don't want to mess with your data, either transit or at rest. We have no idea. So some of the customers are let down there, and I hope that doesn't come across as like a surprise with you and your customers, you know, during or after an incident. And therefore the vendor just is not at all in a position to advise on whether a breach, if you want to use the official word, or a data leak occurred. You may say, hey, throw web app firewall in front of it and call it a day. It would be awesome. But that may break either universally all of your customers, or it may break, oddly enough, just some of them. And so that gets a little tricky. Again, the more customizable your software, arguably, the more things that could go wrong for, you know, a subset of your folks. Some customers, their preferences change. Some would say, I'd rather have the downtime and you to break my system overnight or for 12 hours or whatever it is than to risk any sort of breach. Some customers, uptime is super critical, and they do not want you taking them down no matter what. You kind of can't win there. There's never a single answer. You also have to think about how much downtime might I pause before I have at least like an interim mitigation in place. You may say, hey, throw some rate limiting on it, but you'd be surprised, like 95% of your customers may just access your software as if they were a human. Some may have automated jobs that pull down tons of downloads, do a lot of uploads. You might be surprised that you just, without looking at people's like traffic levels, to say, hey, rate limiting, this is what I think is the same level, and you start to break some of your customers like automated jobs. And hosting providers do not have unlimited capacity against DOS. Everything has a limit. I think we're able to keep, as an industry, keep building up and up our capabilities, but they're not limits. So when it comes to disclosures, and I've been around CNAs and reading CNA rules for quite some time, so I'll present a couple perspectives, not necessarily just my own, but you could argue, if a customer didn't have to take an action, should I bother giving out a CVE, or is it just noise? And a customer is probably like, hey, thanks for handling it. Why bother telling me about this? Even if phones are being patched in your customers' occurrences of the software you're providing them, but patching is happening automatically, maybe monthly, some sort of automation. Did they have to do anything? But to me, there's still value in disclosures, because if I have a customer, or if I have a patching cadence that at the end of April, customers will automatically be patched, but some may say, hey, I want to patch today based on information you gave me. I want to go ahead and opt into business as soon as possible. How soon to publish a CVE, assuming you're like, yeah, we're going to do one, that even can be subject to debate. So one school of thought is release the patch, maybe have a notion of, hey, there's some security fixes in these release notes, and give customers a amount of time to apply the patch, right? So some customers, they may say, hey, I want 6 months, 12 months, like you're probably not going to be able to accommodate that. But do you give them a month and then later develop the full CVE details? The assumption there is that the CVE and all of its details draw a lot of researcher attention for like follow-on research work. But I've also heard another school of thought where some customers are highly driven by only what all management tools are telling them. So if there's no CVE, they don't even their clock doesn't start. They don't even pay attention to it. So you can end up in a condition where you're watching like a little progress bar of customers adopting patches, and then that last bit, they're just never getting there. Why? And so it could be those holdouts are waiting for their tooling to say, hey, there's an issue here. The clock start to fix it. And again, at thousands of customers, as your situation scales, I would say embargo is complex. I don't want to use the word impossible. I would just say I haven't attempted it, and each of those customers can have one or more staff depending on the size of your customer. Some other challenges are trying to figure out customer intent. So did the customer intend to set up their system, your really powerful, highly complex software? Did they intend to set it up that way? Do they know they have it set up that way? And maybe an employee or a consultant came in 10 years ago, set up the platform for them, and then you've got new staff in place, and they have no idea that something was set up as it was, 10 or so years ago, right? And then have people accidentally, and I truly mean accidentally, built on top of a lack of security, and it just works. And then you changing some underlying behavior is going to break them. And you may not even know that in advance without the customer getting hands-on and doing their own testing. More about intentions and their challenges. Breaking changes or changing some of the fundamental behavior of that underlying platform, in my mind, can have a multi-ring model. I chose 3. At the top level, the vendor's responsibility is to change the underlying behavior of the platform. Of the software they make, it's pretty straightforward. If they also sell you applications built on that platform, made available to you as SaaS, that vendor probably also has to make sure the apps didn't break from that underlying change in the platform. And either as a third ring or kind of at the same time as that second ring, you may have yourself, if you put your customer hat on, or if you're like an implementation partner, they may start to write their own code. And follow some of the same practices that your internal devs do, but that underlying behavior may break in their own code. So putting back my educator hat on for a second, I was like, all right, I got like 3 or more different personas of developer audiences to work with. We've got a timing thing, we're gonna like roll out some of these changes. There's just a lot to what happens if you have to change some fundamental behavior of that platform you make. You may be able to try to judge how much software on the customer side that you're confident you can fix yourself. And, and you could possibly be highly confident if I gave someone a copy of the file, the checksum still is the checksum that is the same as what's on my side. I'm like, hey, throwing away like collision concerns for a second, like that file hasn't been modified. So I feel like, all right, let's swap out this function that's in there. This will totally work. We can maybe immediately fix things for the customer. That's awesome. Problem is, even your confidence in that may start to diminish if even like a single character in that file has been changed. You're like, man, this checksum is off. Do we want a chance modifying what is now like customer owned and modified files for them? And you may also, as the host of your customers, you may end up in a position where an internet service is like, hey, your infrastructure is using mine. What are you going to do about it? So you get the responsibility of kind of being the referee between what a customer's software is doing and maybe paying way too often some outside internet services. Another challenge I'd like to categorize is as enablement. So as probably a pretty biased security community here, we want to ship things as secure as possible, like full stop. But the reality is people may have like business use cases that have been around for a while. They're not ready for like 2FA, or they're not ready for like the latest and greatest ciphers and something. And so as a vendor, you're challenged where you're like, all right, so we're going to ship things in a secure way, but we are going to have to give people the option to back that down if they want. And in the court of public opinion, when that customer gets breached, it's still your brand that shows up in the news, unfortunately, and you can't go out and then like totally drag your customer and be like, it's their fault. Like I don't see this as like, there's no win coming out of this. And that's unfortunate. Is like, you're trying to ship secure, you feel obligated to give, lesser options. Someone takes you up on those, something bad happens, your brand is still in the news. Another challenge can be communication failures. So problems that can come up are you have contact info for your customers. They have a security team or security contact, and that is no longer current. It's not tied in with IAM or something. And so you're essentially automatically emailing no one. We're all humans, we take time off. So sometimes a person who's listed may not have listed a backup contact for that super critical communication. You really would like them to see like today, tomorrow, or at least this week. An interesting other thing is the possibility at larger and larger organizations that the security team and the maintenance team for the software you provide are different. A maintenance team may see the notice, be like, okay, and then like later, once you issue CPD, the security team that's running vulnerability management tools might be like, why in the world is this still around? You were told about this 60 days ago. So let them fight that out. But just know that the folks who you're messaging may not always be the one that really needs to advocate for the really quick fixes of things. And then you also get into, if you have an ecosystem around your company of like implementation partners, hosts, whatever it is, sometimes the message doesn't get to that end customer about something. So that implementation partner might be totally asleep, not paying attention to your security comms. And it's unfortunate because what is technically their customer, but still a user of your software, at the very end it's not patched either. Another challenge is eventually we'll get to opportunities. But another challenge is kind of this premise of living off the land where someone can either maliciously or maybe by accident abuse really powerful features that you create. end market, and that's the reason people arguably bought their software is it solves problems for them, really, really complex problems. But you're the host, so things that are computationally intensive, you know, you get to put the bill unless you have some sort of shared billing model. This can again include the abuse of external services. Remember the internet companies that might come to you and say, what is going on here? And then I mentioned that a lot of this living off the land stuff or just resource abuse or whatever it is might not even be malicious. It might be like really just poorly written code, like loops that like don't stop. And you're like, it's like a 101 error right there. So there is the possibility that not everything bad is from like malicious causes. So another challenge is that hosted providers are not only responsible for that product or that bit of software that they sell you, but also like everything underneath it. Also may end up, your PSIRT may end up involved in resolving vulnerabilities in just like the supporting infrastructure, load balancers, like backend services. If you have like a AI services or identity or whatever it is, storage, you're responsible for all that as well. And don't forget, if you do have an on-prem business model where you're like, hey, we're like 99% hosted customer base, but we still have that 1% who wants to like lock their software in their own basement or whatever, like you are giving out your software, obfuscated or not, to outside parties. So you can't just sit back and be like, hey, we're going to fix this thing. No one's ever going to know like that it was an issue, or no one's going to deeply understand this mitigation we put in place because no one's going to look at the patches, and that's not true. Because one, you may literally be like giving your software to people, and the other is, I've seen a few researchers talk about how they like kind of social engineer or like tactically acquire software to then start reversing it, even if you're a purely hosted company. So another challenge is what I just want to categorize as like steering. Just kind of made that up in this context, but blocking the ability for customers to roll back to a vulnerable version. Again, it's like an opinion, right? You're saying, hey, customers, once you've moved to version 10 that no longer has the vulnerabilities in version 9, we're going to revoke your ability to ever create a new server with version 9. And or take your production server that you rolled to 10, stuff broke, you can't roll it back to 9. So that is an opinion where you're saying on the customer's behalf, your breakage is less important than being re-exposed to something that we fixed in version 10. This doesn't just have to be like a platform level. This could also be if you're selling apps and you have an app store or something, you may revoke, version 17 of some application that you have for sale. 18 is the newest. No one else can go find 17 and ever install it again. So the same sort of thing. And you get into a judgment call, what's a reasonable amount of soak time for customers to test their changes, right? So customers may be like, hey, I'm going to update my sub-prod instances or sub-production instances. I want to go test this for like 30 days to see what broke, before we roll it out in production. But again, a researcher from like the day, sometimes the day they told you about something, they want to go blog about it in like 90 days. That's fair game. But like, you may have customers who want 6 to 12 months to test changes, and you're not going to make both happy. So just a heads up. We'll flip over to opportunities here. Again, it's definitely the smaller part of the presentation, but as a host, you may also be hosting infrastructure that later kind of became helpful as a honeypot, where you're like, oh, those were like demo instances. They have nothing important, but like people are scanning it, and you're like, oh, interesting. Like, okay, kind of nice. And one funny potential scenario, it's up to you on what to do about it. But let's say someone has scanned a ton of your infrastructure. They're like, man, I have all of this very valuable data in this data set. I'm going to go sell it on the forum. And you're like, question yourself. You're like, did we patch sufficient? Like, did we fix something? Do they know something we don't? Or the other outcome is you get your hands on a sample of that data or all that data. and you find out it's all demo data from like your demo instances. And you're like, man, I hope no one buys this. Like it's terrible data. Up to you, you can't really professionally go out and say, hey, this is full of junk and stuff, but it may cause you and your incident response team to be like, hey, are we as sufficiently remediated as we thought? At the end of the day, one thing you could think about is don't have your demo environments heavily lag on just that patching rigor you do with customers' production instances. Maybe they're less important, but the problem is like, if and when someone really enthusiastic breaks into one of those demo instances and then takes a screenshot and tweets about it, it's still, again, your vendor in the news causing concern, maybe get something to pick up. And then you're in a position where you're like, hey, yeah, that's true, but like, that's not an important instance. And you still look bad for not patching everything wrong. So another opportunity is in observability. So no vulnerability is good, but those that you're seeing what you think is exploit attempts is bad, right? So, or especially bad. So you can sometimes be a bit sane about what to accelerate a predefined remediation SLA about. So if you're like, hey, we fixed criticals in 15 days, but I'm seeing what looks like a ton of scanning activity, do I totally disrupt that engineering group or business unit and say, hey, I'm sorry about those features that people are about to pay us for that we, marketed, but like, I need, you to consider this to be your highest priority right now. So again, if you have some amount of observability or can work with a team that does, again, no vuln is great. There's reason to get complacent, but those where you're seeing a lot of scanning activity, you might be like, all right, this is worth accelerating how quickly we fix this far in advance of what your normal SLAs are with engineering. Some other cool observability stuff you might be able to do is say like, hey, yes, a really terrible vulnerabilities in our software, but it's only in the thing that's bleeding edge. We just made it last week, like 0.1% of our customers are using it, and they're just kind of trialing it right now. So like, yeah, it's like a CVSS 10, it's like the worst thing ever, very severe. But you might be like, all right, let's go measure the adoption of versions in the wild of our platform. Are people even on that bleeding edge thing? Maybe not. Is the vulnerability in the thing that's going that everyone's rolling off of in the next like 15 days anyway, just because keeping up with current versions, maybe. Even if that underlying software is on a version that has the vulnerability, if it depends on something like certain configurations or some little modular component to actually be reachable, you may be able to go determine like how many people are actually using this app or this configuration. You're like, all right, 10% of people have the app, but like literally no one's using it. And maybe it's not the most critical thing to, again, disrupt folks like today about. And another little measure you might be able to do is the level of use of whatever the problem application is. So you may make an app, I don't know, maybe it has help data or something, and you're like, all right, so we see the customer has it installed in like production. You can ask them if you wish to say, hey, is this critical? But another thing you could do is look and say, it really doesn't look like they're populating it with, just much volume, if any, of data. Bearing in mind that zero is not always the answer because your component or whatever may ship with out of the box demo data to just so people get to know what populated application should look like. So don't freak yourself out that there is data in there if you're the one who provided it. And then a final slide on opportunities is the ability to really speed up things again if you're like, all right, this does look like it's being exploited, or a researcher is like, I'm extremely frustrated with you, I'm going to go write about it tomorrow, and it doesn't look like you're going to be able to get yourself any more time. You might be able to do things like force changes onto customer instances, or again, like really urgently bother your customers and say, hey, please address this in the next 24 hours or something. Awesome for security, you get rid of the issue really quickly, but it's super disruptive, and you probably can only do that so many times. So it's disruptive within the vendor as well as for everyone, your customers, to drop what they're doing and go deal with your latest thing. So definitely think about that quite a bit. It also, I've heard one school of thought I thought was interesting, and I never thought about it myself, but they were like, hey, we might be negatively establishing precedent here. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, patches are good. Like, what's going on? And they're like, all right, remember shared responsibility model? And I was like, all right. And the argument is that if you as a vendor go above and beyond in those critical cases and go and force changes onto customer instances, again, looking out for best for them, the customer could, as a takeaway, sit back and be like, all right, well, in those times where it really, really matters, the vendor is going to look out for my best interest and patch for me. So like, I was like, oh, that's a bad outcome. So that's just another thing to think about. If you're going above and beyond every single time, that could be precedent for that customer to sit with. And again, breaking something, I think in security, I often forget that like availability is like one of the tenets. And if you have a vulnerability that affects confidentiality or integrity, and you go break something and take it offline, like you just kind of switched over to an availability impact and like got rid of any concern about I or C. And then hopefully anything you might break or something doesn't last too long, but potentially it could count against uptime guarantees you have with the customer, and then you get into you have to give them credits. What do you owe someone for breaking them, even if you were trying to fix an issue? So one bonus opportunity I didn't put on there is in PSIRTs. You get an interesting perspective because you get to see all the areas of improvement that happened along the way before an issue ended up with your team. And not that we're perfect, but you just get that perspective of seeing like all the stuff from the origination of the issue, plus like operational problems, any sort of problems, technical or not, people in process, that created this reason that something is up on your desk, so to speak. So again, thank you very much. We ripped through that pretty quick. I know they gave me, I don't know, 2 30-minute blocks. Didn't know if I'd use both. But what we talked about today was my argument that PSIRT as a SaaS has challenges and opportunities that are different than those at a strictly on-prem vendor. So we can flip over to questions and feedback. And
thank you, Garrett. If anyone has questions, you either can type it into the Discord channel if you're shy or virtual, or we have an amazing microphone here. You can sashay your way over to the corner and ask your question verbally. We have plenty of time.
Oh, and the reason for the mic is remote folks need to know the question.
Hi, at my prior company, I won't name the name. They got into security as a service because we had discovered that internal entities had started setting up services without going through the proper approval processes, et cetera. So that left us scrambling, but I can truthfully say we encountered a number of the issues that you're talking about, especially the speed compared to regular product security incident response. 10x, 20x faster. You have to move. So just want to commensurate with you.
Oh, it's all good. Yeah, thank you. Not grilling me either. Yeah, it's tough. And sometimes another thing you think about is like, hey, we could do a half solution today. And you're like, should we? And one school of thought is like, okay, we closed half the issue really quickly. That's awesome. Again, assuming you're not seeing like exploit activity. But the other is like, customers might end up being really confused, but they're like, I thought you fixed this. And we're like, we half did on Tuesday, and then we did the other half on Thursday. And they're like, what are you doing? Like, Like, you know, we've got all these like, change requests that came in, we get all these maintenance notices. You know, when are things complete, or we can consider this done? And you end up in an awkward spot having to understand, like, or educate on like full remediation versus mitigation. So.
Okay, so we have two questions. I'll go one by one. So first is like, what are some of the additional roles your team plays for SaaS service as well other than ship on-prem products?
Some of the roles.
Uh-huh.
Interesting. So our team actually does quite a bit. Now, I wouldn't say it's just because we're like a mostly hosted company. And when I talk to other PSIRTs, it's interesting to see like what all services we're involved in. But for some of my folks who know our software and have been around for years, then I also ask them to do like derivative research. Say, hey, you know, we're told about one issue. Does this exist anywhere else, right? So that's some of the stuff we end up with. Content review. So we're happy to have disclosures. We just want to make sure they're accurate. So like we're often reading upcoming disclosures and say, hey, is this technically accurate? Is it, you know, fair? That sort of thing. So.
Yeah, cool. Then second question is, any advice for the companies who are in the transformation phase from on-prem to SaaS from PSIRT perspective to build the capability?
I don't know. The presentation right before this, I think GitHub was talking about they split CSIRT and PSIRT. I don't know if you would want to start there and then later figure out how to split, but it just comes with a lot more subject matter expertise you might not have right off the bat. Like you have like Java folks and you're making your app, and then all of a sudden it's like, all right, what about Nginx? What about like some backend service that came from some company you bought a year ago that is something else? So you're in for a learning curve, I guess. So.
Hey there. So you had talked a few slides back about sort of the pros and cons of disclosing your stats vulnerabilities.
Yeah, dicey.
Getting this is one of the slides go in. How do you view where to draw that line between the actual application code versus the supporting infrastructure as far as disclosures that you think would be valuable for customers to still receive versus giving them alert fatigue every time we get something in infrastructure?
I've seen it. So I'm working on our CB policy now, revising it, but I started looking at what other large tech companies do. I won't call them out, but some, like I would say, are like really leading edge, where they're like critical on high severity. Even if no customer action is required, they'll still tell you about it. And I was like, it's kind of cool if you have like the person power to do it. It's more disclosures to write, and maybe customer questions. But I saw that, like, what I would just bucket as like the leading edge folks. You could just draw the line at customer action, whether required. It's like, why bother someone about it? And another little gotcha that I've seen is having to dive into services that I thought were hosted only, but we provide an on-prem version as well. And I was like, ooh, okay, so that one we sometimes give out to people. And then that is like, to me, just traditional, you know, on-prem stuff.
So you're more looking at doing just the application code in case there's an on-prem deployment?
Yeah, so if it's on-prem, to me, that's like way more straightforward. I was like, yeah, and it seems like customers would have to take action to patch even that, like what I thought was a hosted shared service, for sure. And then I do think it's neat just to watch like the trend of transparency for those notable, you know, backend vulnerabilities as well.
I was hoping to get your experiences with publicly known vulnerabilities, CVEs reported by customers. They come to you, ask usually infrastructure or something like that. And they say, are you vulnerable? Are you going to be fixing this? and you do your research, you find out, okay, we're not using that part of the code, or we have this infrastructure control in place. It's not that high a priority, we'll get to it during a normal update cycle, right? We're not vulnerable to that in the way that the CVE is describing, even though it says it's a 10.
Yeah,
How have those conversations gone?
thankfully pretty smooth so far. So like Tomcat the other day, really bad one, but you had to like modify the default value to make your file system read only, and I was like, there was like a bunch of reasons. In the end, we were not at all effective, but so we had to dive into it, and I think it was pretty smooth. The customers were like, hey, I read about this thing in the news. And we just want to know, are you affected by this? And so we do our deep dive to find out those preconditions and then find out affected or not. Plus, again, if you do have things, I don't know, other mitigations in place, it's almost a good opportunity to talk about them. Be like, hey, no, we're not. But it's interesting. I'm trying to get in the game of predicting which outside CVEs are going to cause inquiries, so we can maybe get to it like 12 to 24 hours sooner. I don't have a list.
The vulnerability of the day, right?
Yeah. And sometimes it's even non-product stuff. I think I've been asked about like the move it vulnerability and whatnot. And I was like, yeah, sorry, it's not your product. So that was pretty quick. So, thank you. Yeah.
And if this particular topic, specifically PSIRT, software as a service cloud, is of interest to you, the first PSIRT SIG is in the beginning stages of revising the services framework. And this is one of the work areas we identified about a year ago. We need to have some additional instructions or some new information. So if this is something you're interested in participating in, we're going to be help shaping some of the framework around this. So Patch is welcome. Keep an eye out and join us to help update the framework for this important area that a lot of us are dealing with today.
Calls are on Thursdays, right?
On Thursdays.
That's awesome. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, believe me, I was going to come bother you after this. So does anyone have any other questions online or in the room? We've got a little bit of time before the next call, so please go get refreshment, visit our sponsors. Make sure you scan the QR code right here with this amazing work. Let's take a round of applause. Thank you.